This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently. That's okay. Things are gonna be okay.
What's up, Disgenerates? I'm Jefferson, half of the disc golf world, and we gotta talk about the possible bankruptcy of dynamic discs. But remember, those are in air quotes, because I don't quite think that's the reality yet. First, big thanks to everyone supporting over on Patreon. If you want more unfiltered disc golf content, head over there. Former Dynamic and House of Discs employee went to Reddit for an Ask Me Anything where he said, "I'm an open book. Ask me anything and I'll answer as long as I can speak factually and without objectivity." Head over to the original post to read everything he had to say, but I'm going to go through the most thought-provoking here. And don't worry, I won't make you pause and read, although I'm only going to give the cliff notes over here. The biggest question, rightfully so, was about the rumored consolidating debt on Dynamic and the planning of an eventual bankruptcy. It's what Drew titled his breaking news sit-down video after all. Chris went on to answer that he could not comment because he had not heard of said rumor. Now I will say I've heard of this accusation murmured throughout the industry, however that easily could have been a game of telephone gone wrong. Or we all know the classic person who exaggerates. Our boy Chris did confirm financial struggles for House of Discs as a whole, which has had question marks surrounding it with no real evidence publicly. This is where Drew Gibson alluded to the bankruptcy, as a company can only be operating at a loss for so long.
If they're losing money on, even if it's just a little bit on every corner, House of Discs is writing the check for that whole entire thing. So it's like if every company is just losing 50 grand, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, I mean, that's a big check to write at the end of every month. So I'm not saying that Ricky and or Kona cost them. I'm just saying that when you monopolize something in a small niche sport, the monopolization of losses also becomes relevant.
There hasn't been any official word of Dynamic going bankrupt, but the same can't be said about former CEO's new business venture, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before that, I want to touch on how Drew is saying he knew House of Discs was struggling.
I knew that House of Discs as a whole was struggling really bad when they gave a kid who hasn't won an A tier in 2 years a signature disc for the Song of the Summer. I personally have no problem with the thing. I mean, if that's how you want to react, then cool. But like when that turned into a signature disc and promotions and Instagram stuff, I knew like, oh wow, they're grinding for some cash flow. And this person typically wouldn't bring in cash flow, and now they are.
I'm gonna skip past those strays to Silas Schultz only because he has bars like these.
I got some haters in my way, but I don't really see y'all. You say fat jokes are overplayed, wait. Just like your career, dog, just like you on YouTube, just like you on lead cards, you say that you're the form god, then why'd your arm fall apart?
I honestly don't understand Drew's logic here. I mean, he explains it perfectly in the video why they would rather make a disc for a player who might need more financial compensation instead of, as you named, the kid setting the single season money record. You can argue that Gannon had less of a risk of selling out, but Silas made sure to let us know that the diss track discs sold out quickly. So for once, I actually appreciated something the corporate monster did. It also makes complete sense to capitalize off this momentum. For the time being, everybody in the disc golf community was bumping to it. I mean, how could you not? The dude literally said,
Seeing you as a threat is something that never occurred to me. Money, power, respect, and yo, you don't get the third from me. Need skin grafts for my paragraphs getting burned in the third degree.
That I didn't take it personally. I took it as, oh, you guys are doing this poorly, that this is like a good decision for you guys to do. And again, I just made note of that and said, okay, well, that's sad that you guys are at that point, but you would think that you'd make, Gannon Burr an extra signature disc, or Ricky an extra signature disc, or, get Kona to do some stuff versus rewarding some song. But again, that showed me the health of their brands as a whole at that time, where they saw something that they could capitalize on, and they did.
I'm confused. Is Drew not describing good marketing? The diss track was fire, and the disc sold out immediately. So not sure how the conclusion is this is some dire attempt to get pity sales. That's more like stamping other sports teams on your discs. Sorry, had to defend Silus real quick after taking unnecessary strays after providing the Song of the Summer. Back to the AMA now. Remember that helicopter Dynamic bought for Ricky's announcement? Apparently they spent $8,000 on that. That's a worse idea than blowing up a literal basket for an ad. I will say that got edited out, so either not true or a slip of the tongue, or I guess type of the finger. He also makes clear that one of the biggest mistakes of Dynamic was the misuse of money during the COVID spike. Makes mention of moving to a new location and just spending money on things that weren't needed, and lots of them. They were spending money like crazy to enhance the optics of Dynamic, all while giving their employees a $50 gift card to its own retail store as a Christmas gift. But they were allowed to use that on top of their 40% discount, so maybe Scrooge over there should be a little bit more grateful. Somebody asked, did the operations department get completely axed? No one's answering the phones or emails, and I've had a shipment due from Westside for a while. Is there current turmoil? Which Chris then responded, the GM is rarely there, instead in Florida. Not a good sign when he's described as being as incompetent as they come when it comes to running a business of that size, which he imagines they are suffering because of. That's what you want to see from a company that doesn't really have a whole lot going on for it. And then you have Chris saying, I know that they went ahead with separating the Westside website, which was cautioned as a terrible idea. I don't know what sales look like, so I can't comment on the health of the brand. I can't comment on the health of the brand either, but that's only because I don't see anything. Maybe whoever kidnapped Matty O got the rest of the employees. The topic that got a lot of attention was the hints towards Dynamic, or should I say House of Discs, wanting to cut Ricky Wysocki's contract early. A rumor we heard as far back as August. The conversation started with someone asking if Ricky's contract ever ended up being worth it, along with Kona's. To no one's surprise, he said no. He went further into talking about sponsoring players not necessarily being worth it, saying that the return from using players' name, image, and likeness saw small return. Hard to say that when the brand does the absolute bare minimum player marketing. They were doing better 6 years ago under Bobby Brown than they are now. Now it's time to talk about how mismanaged Dynamic was and why the ROI wasn't on the fault of the players. We have to put some blame on the company for being lazy in terms of marketing. When the face of your brand is the second best player in the world and you give him 6 different raters with the same stamp to sell, a person can only buy so many. Also, try to sell 10,000 prototype agents. Doesn't work. Do you even know anyone that throws that? Okay, now that we discovered the 4 people that know what an agent is, how does any reasonable person think they're going to sell 10,000 of them? Chris then describes the idea was for top moneymakers to generate revenue in other ways. Pretty much saying Ricky gets free advertising through his play, which is why there's no longer a reason to pay for practice round videos. Ever wonder why those didn't start until the Beaver State Fling this past year? That's because Ricky had to start paying for them out of his own pocket, which I do respect, giving the people what they want when he totally didn't have to. Do yourself a favor and take a peek at those comments too, and you'll see the positive impact of those videos. Makes me wonder how the people at House of Discs didn't see the value of this, but apparently media wasn't at the top of their priority list. We'll get into the questionable firings in a second, but we have to set the scene for those that aren't in the know. Chris gave a bit of background information when asked if the change from Dynamic to House of Discs hurt the culture for employees. He said not right away, but in the long run, yes, stating that the change was initially welcoming and most people were excited for a new direction. But the corporate greed took over once revenue goals were not met. That meaning spending and hiring freezes, limiting compensation increases, and ultimately cutting staff down, which then meant passing additional work to others who were given no reason to work any harder. Completely getting rid of a working environment that people enjoyed being a part of, draining the love for working in the sport into now just for a paycheck. Just look at Dynamic now compared to what it was pre-COVID. Now stripped of the family vibe they once had into, I don't even know what the brand is, because apparently it's not the Christian boys I thought. It's ironic because when I was younger, I used to strive to work for Dynamic, as in my opinion, they were ahead of the game when it came to social media. Cool Daddy Slick Breeze pioneered some of the content that has been copied 1,000 times over, but back then was revolutionary, setting the brand and players apart. Not just the pros either. They focused on juniors, discs, employees, you name it. If it was Dynamic, it got attention. Made you feel like you were actually a part of the family. Can't say that anymore, as all the OG guys are no longer a part of the squad. The last one I believe was Anthony, who made this emotional filled video about the questionable firing. Highly recommend watching that, as we got even more background from Chris. Allegedly, Anthony had been promised a promotion prior to being laid off, and then was completely blindsided right after the birth of his child. Oh, and then immediately hired someone to do his job in Wellington shortly after. To brainless corporate hacks, when you aren't assigning the creative content creator tasks that give them a chance to show off what they're skilled at, it's a waste. I'm sure they realized that, and instead of continuing to give them various jobs on top of the stack of miscellaneous work that had already been given to them, let them go for a cheaper option. Danny even commented that once Bobby left, it went from creating fun content to justifying the time he was spending on videos with disc sales. Hard to show with data how in the bags were selling discs, which is why you saw less practice rounds and more ads. Even with an abundance of content already shot, they were told to work on other tasks that had nothing to do with media, leaving all that film content to be unused. Which is a shame, because once that culture of dynamic was lost, you can see how much less people cared. At this rate, it's harder to find someone who bags DD than it is for me to understand what the hell any of this means. For those wondering why I'm saying this is questionable, I have no idea, but people on Reddit are always right, so if anyone knows, drop it in the comments. Here's an answer to everyone asking why a former employee would even want to do an AMA. Most thought there was juicy details to be told, but here's the main story. Pause to read the unfortunate firing of Chris and his wife, who were a part of Dynamic for nearly 10 years, traveling across the country from trade show to trade show, growing the brand through pure passion. Not only does it sound like long-term employees are being let go, but former owners that reinvested substantial amount of money are getting pushed out. At least that's what it sounded like from Drew's video.
The people, who were the owners, kind of getting pushed out a little bit, and their creative freedom being taken probably more than they would want. And I know that the owners, like just say UC Marisma, invested, they bought Discmania, but then he was promoted, or talked into investing some of his buyout back into House of Discs to still be involved. And, I believe his amount was a pretty substantial amount that he invested back, and then slowly has just gotten kind of pushed out of the roles that he would probably like to have at Discmania.
Could be speculation, but definitely go check out the full vid, and I'm not only saying that because of the one air quote per minute average, but he gives more perspective on the situation and even talks about iPhones not coming with headphones. Got a few more interesting answers from Chris to touch on, but I'll try to go faster than a Nico putt. Hey, I can make those jokes over here. Here's the context.
You're going to hear him in the comments. Why doesn't he just putt like that in the tournament? He's going to take 45 seconds. None of that shit on my channel.
There was a couple things alluding to Latitude 64 and Discmania being the brands with more focus, as Dynamic for the longest time was the face of Trilogy, and it couldn't really be argued otherwise. Chris even making a comment that Latitude doesn't feel like they are a younger brother and probably view themselves as the opposite. When they secure Isaac, it'll make that statement easier to accept. Also saying that player contracts are a joke and there's essentially no mediation, and that is something that needs to be absolutely fixed. We can't keep talking about how shitty these contracts are for players and continue to let Suge Knight sign kids' lives away for some free plastic. And last thing is Seth catching strays, and it's only because it made me chuckle. If you're interested in hearing more what Chris had to say, go check out the full thing over on Reddit. But these were the most important things you should know. Now we can move on to the struggles of Champions Landing, which was bought by former Dynamic Discs owner Jamie Rusko and home of the DDO. This was brought to our attention from the Smashbox podcast.
Jeremy had made the decision that he's going to close Champions Landing, and after making a run over this last year at it,
the property was transformed with the vision to get rid of the elitist vibe and build a family-friendly environment that still had a focus on disc golf. This included using the swimming pool again, added a coffee bar, fine dining, and more to hopefully make Champions Landing a staple in the town of Emporia. Unfortunately, the rebrand was not successful, as it costed more to maintain the golf course and pool than it was bringing in. Jeremy had to make the sad decision to close up shop.
Employed a lot of people, brought in certain people, done all these things to close Champions Landing. But wait.
After announcing to his employees that the place was shutting down, it didn't sit right with him, so he reached back out and said, "In every marriage, you get one chance to say, 'I need you to do this with me.'" And that was this moment. Terry then explains the new plan.
So moving forward, our focus will shift to disc golf. a growing and vibrant community activity that brings more closely within our financial resources. More details: staffing adjustments, cashless operations, season passes will be discontinued. That's for the old one. The swimming pool closure, increased focus on events that they're going to have out there still, prioritizing weddings, private parties, live music, and community events. And for now, they're going to keep the Champs Coffee Shop open.
As much as everyone likes to shit on the DDO, that course is iconic and has a place in disc golf. Would be a real shame to see that one go away. Hopefully there can be something done to save it, but I'm afraid it's not looking good. That's all that happened this weekend in disc golf, but we got another big week of the offseason ahead of us. To stay up to date with everything you need to know to sound smart at the local putting league, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Sum this up in less than 10 words. House of Disc, I think that they might be in trouble.